worked for several years at South Pittsburgh Hospital in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, USA, and had several paranormal events. This is one of them. One night I was working in the laboratory alone. We were doing a test that was run from a kit. It was a cardiac test called a troponin. And part of that test was to set the little vial down on the countertop. This was back in the days before we had as much automation in the lab as we do now. We'd set the little test kit on the countertop, put some patient sample in it, and watch for it to absorb before we could add the other reagents. I was standing there at the countertop, putting in the sample, absorbed in my work, not paying attention to my surroundings, and I happened to look up and noticed my shadow on the wall across from me. Then I noticed there was a second shadow that appeared to be larger than mine on the wall, right behind my shadow. My first thought was it was the light, because we had several lights and lamps in that laboratory that light shone from several directions. But when I moved, that shadow didn't move. So then my second thought was it was one of my coworkers messing with me. I turned around and there was no one there. When I looked back at the wall again, the shadow was gone. So I determined I was just tired. It was about 3 a.m. And I thought I'm a little wore out, a little crazy. I'm gonna go out, take a break, go down the hall, collect some patient samples, and come back. So I left the lab, went down the hall, went to the nurse's station, got a cup of coffee, finished that, went in a couple of rooms, drew blood from patients, and then I brought the patient samples back to the lab. As I came through the lab door, I could hear my timer going off. So I knew it was time to add more reagent to the test and then get the final result. So I walked through the lab, set my tray of samples down on the countertop, went back to where my test kit was. And once again, I was real absorbed in the work, putting in the reagent, watching the sample to make sure it absorbed correctly. And I felt a breath on the back of my neck, and I could feel someone physically leaning over my right shoulder, just all but touching me. I could feel the presence, like they were right there looking over my shoulder to see what I was doing. And I looked up, and there the shadow was again, but this time it was leaning over me. Now, this shadow was huge. It was probably a foot and a half taller than me. And I immediately assumed it was somebody messing with me. So I drew back and said, "Hey, stop." And looked around, and there was no one in the lab but me. I was a little startled at that point, and I decided there's something different about this place.